Miriam transferred to our school, and I decided to give up on Adrian. At first, it was just because of a small thing. After Miriam finished her self-introduction, when the homeroom teacher was hesitating about where to seat her, Adrian raised his hand and said, "Teacher, let her sit next to me." The whole class let out a whoa, and then their gazes, intentionally or not, shifted toward me, curious about my reaction, because everyone knew that Adrian and I were childhood friends. Every time after the monthly exams, when I asked if he wanted to sit together, he always refused, saying he was used to sitting alone. I looked up at Adrian. He didn't notice my gaze. He was only exchanging a tacit smile with Miriam, who was standing on the podium, watching this scene. I didn't know why, but I suddenly felt tired. Chapter 1. After Miriam sat down, the homeroom teacher left. It was between classes, so once he left, the classroom gradually became noisy. Quite a few classmates whispered as they looked in our direction, their eyes landing first on Miriam, then on Adrian beside her, and finally, as if by agreement, all on me. I lowered my head and worked on my problems, ignoring those stares, until Miriam finished tidying up her things, turned around, and smiled sweetly at me. "Isabella, long time no see." Her tone was warm and familiar, as if the conflicts between us 2 years ago had never happened. I lifted my head, not looking at Adrian, who was glancing my way, but staring directly at Miriam. My voice was polite yet distant as I nodded lightly and said, "Long time no see." And before she could respond, I lowered my head again and continued working on my physics exercises. My unwillingness to catch up was obvious, and since Miriam was always good at reading the room, she sensibly turned back around, dropping her usual act of pretending nothing had ever happened, the way she normally played at being everyone's friend. Isolde, who sat beside me, was dumbfounded by the exchange. She looked restless, clearly dying to gossip. But the class bell rang, and besides, with the people involved sitting right in front of us, no amount of whispering would go unheard. So, as the bell rang, she slipped me a little note that read, "What happened?" Just from the number of question marks, I could tell how eager she was to dig into the gossip. I crumpled the note in my palm and glanced at the row in front. Adrian and Miriam had their heads close together. He was pointing at the textbook for the next class and whispering something to her, probably explaining where we were in the course. The curve of his side profile was so gentle. Adrian rarely showed this kind of patience. Most of the time, he was cold and easily irritated. Once, I had missed some classes due to a fever. When I returned, he explained the progress in physics to me, but after only a few minutes, he grew impatient, frowned, and snapped, "Isabella, why are you so dumb?" I wasn't dumb, I just needed him to be a little patient. I had always thought he was simply an impatient person, but now it seems, he wasn't impatient, he just didn't have patience for me. Chapter 2. This period was math class. After the lesson, it would be self-study, so near the end the teacher called out to me, "Isabella, go to my office and bring those 2 sets of test papers. Hand them out to everyone. Finish them tonight. We'll go over the example problems tomorrow morning." I agreed, stood up, and walked out of the classroom. Isolde quickly stood up too and asked, "Teacher, can I go with Isabella?" Once we reached the corridor outside, she lowered her voice and asked me, "Isabella, what's going on between you, Adrian, and that new transfer student?" I paused for a moment. I knew Isolde was worried about me. After all, everyone knew I liked Adrian. Our families lived next door, and in the eyes of our elders, we were childhood sweethearts. I had liked him since I was little. Adrian was the star of the campus, handsome, with good grades, well-liked, and carrying himself with that casual, careless charm that made him even more popular. That's how young love is, no matter how carefully you try to hide it. It slips through your eyes uncontrollably. Everyone could see it, so they teased, pairing my name with Adrian's. Of course, Adrian knew too. Sometimes, he even played along with those jokes, adding fuel to the rumors with lighthearted teasing. It felt like a silent, unspoken kind of intimacy, but neither of us ever made it clear. Apart from focusing on school, I didn't fully understand Adrian either. There were times when he was so gentle with me that I began to doubt if he truly meant something more. But when I gathered my courage to ask, he would turn distant again, smoothly changing the subject, as if everything had just been my misunderstanding. I'm not the type to chase after someone who doesn't want me. When he was cold, I naturally held myself back and kept my distance. But the moment I pulled away, he would come close again. Isolde once told me that Adrian only enjoyed the way I treated him, the care, the obvious affection in my actions. He didn't like me, but he also didn't want to lose me. I couldn't really understand that. In my world, love was simple. You like someone, or you don't. If you like them, you accept them. If you don't, you clearly reject them. But I couldn't deny it. Adrian's vague attitude, never too close and never too far, made it impossible for me to firmly place him in the just a friend category. What really gave me hope happened not long ago. After a monthly mock exam, my grades were balanced across all subjects, except that I was weak in chemistry. Since we were about to be separated into liberal arts and science classes, the homeroom teacher had recently advised me to choose science, but I preferred liberal arts because I wanted to be a diplomat. Yet Adrian said to me, "Isabella, choose science." His tone was casual, but then he added an agreement, "Let's go to the same university together." I froze for a moment, my ears burning, and asked, pretending to be calm, "What kind of agreement is that?" He just looked at me, smiling without answering, and I instantly felt alive again. I was like a fish, and whenever I was on the verge of drying out and dying, he would sprinkle just enough water to keep me going. But now that Miriam had transferred here, I figured he wouldn't even bother to sprinkle that little bit of water anymore. I sighed, and Isolde looked at me worriedly. I didn't want to hide it from her. I knew she truly cared about me, but in truth, the past between Miriam, Adrian, and me wasn't as complicated as she imagined. Chapter 3. Miriam was a classmate of mine and Adrian's back in middle school. She transferred into our class in the second year because of her father's job relocation. At that time, the girls in our class already had their fixed circles. Since Miriam was very pretty, it was a bit difficult for her to blend in at first. I was well-liked in class, easygoing, approachable, and good at my studies, so Miriam came to get close to me. Her seat was across the aisle, diagonally behind me. One morning, I hadn't had time to eat breakfast, and after morning study I was starving. I asked my desk mate if she had anything to eat. Somehow Miriam overheard, and she passed me her bread with a bright smile, saying, "I just happened to buy an extra this morning. Here, take it." I felt a little embarrassed. Later, she kept striking up harmless conversations with me, asking questions I always patiently answered. Eventually, whenever there was an activity, I would bring her along, and in this way she blended into my circle of friends, and that was how she got to know Adrian. At that time, Adrian and I were what you could call true childhood sweethearts. Even though, just like now, nothing was openly stated, he wasn't distant or ambiguous with me the way he is now. When he skipped class to go to the internet cafe to play online games, he would bring me my favorite fried skewers from that shop I loved. He would cover for me so I could sneak out with friends to attend a concert of my favorite singer. Once, I twisted my ankle during gym class, and he carried me to and from school, later staying by my side throughout rehab. In countless moments when I felt like I couldn't keep dragging things out with him, I would pick up these fragments of memories. Those hazy yet beautiful moments became my reason to hold on, making me believe that this innocent crush of mine might someday turn into something more. But the turning point in my relationship with Adrian probably started around the time Miriam transferred to our school, because Miriam had been moving around with her father's job since she was young. She was far more socially smooth than most kids our age. She was good at reading people, too, so I quickly came to see her as a friend. Since Adrian and I often spent time together, Miriam naturally grew familiar with him through me. But when the three of us were together, she usually spoke very little, often just quietly listening. She seemed so harmless that I never realized it. Only later did I notice that when I was alone with Miriam, our conversations always seemed to circle back to Adrian, his preferences, his embarrassing moments, his moods and expressions. I knew Adrian so well, and through me, Miriam came to know him inside and out without even having much direct contact with him. She even teased me, like a good friend would, about the little details that betrayed my feelings for Adrian. There's not much more to say about what came after. When a new movie starring an actor Adrian liked was released, I asked him to go see it with me. He told me he was busy. Later, while I was dragged out shopping by a friend, we happened to pass by the cinema, only to see Adrian and Miriam walking out together after the movie. Unlike the quietness she showed when it was the three of us, Miriam was smiling radiantly, chatting animatedly with Adrian, who looked gentler than usual. They were probably discussing the plot of the movie they'd just watched. I had never known that the usually quiet Miriam even had such a lively side, and I had never imagined that the two of them, behind my back, had grown so close. I froze, unable to dodge in time, until Miriam and Adrian looked up and saw me. Miriam's face stiffened, slightly awkward, but she quickly adjusted and greeted me with her usual smile. Adrian, however, tried to explain in a way that only made things worse. Miri also likes that actor. You don't like him, right? So I went to see it with Miriam. Miri, what a familiar, intimate name. My gaze dropped from his face to Miriam behind him. I noticed the unnatural look on her face and paused. But I didn't expose her, because I remembered that when I told her who Adrian's favorite actor was, she looked puzzled and actually asked me, "Who is that? What famous roles has he played?" There wasn't much more to say, although she knew I liked Adrian and used me to get close to him and extract the information she wanted. At that time there was nothing between Adrian and me. She was free to do as she wished. I was just disgusted by her scheming. I wasn't a pushover, so I naturally started keeping my distance. I stopped walking with her and grew increasingly cold toward her. I didn't tell anyone why, but whenever Miriam was around, I avoided those situations. The friends who used to include her only because of me gradually stopped inviting her after a few times when I didn't show up, though they didn't know what had happened. She's nice, very gentle, and thoughtful when she talks. But I don't know, something feels off. She just seems insincere. Isabella, weren't you always so good to her? Bringing her breakfast, copying homework for her, explaining problems. Why are you drifting away now? I shook my head and steered clear of that topic. I considered myself well-mannered, no matter what. I didn't like stirring up gossip behind someone's back. That wasn't gentlemanly behavior. I never expected that one day Adrian would step up to defend her. He looked at me with cold disappointment and asked, holding back, "Isabella, are you the one leading everyone to ostracize Miriam?" Though it was phrased as a question, the certainty in his tone felt like a verdict. It was delivered as if it were a statement. I thought it was absurd, but I've always had a calm temper. I forced myself to ask, "Why would you think that?" He asked, "Then why are people around you ignoring her?" He was trying to be as tactful as possible, I suppose. I didn't know what Miriam had said in front of him, but all the anger I'd been holding interrupted. I looked at Adrian and replied coldly, "I despise her character." What followed was a blur of quarrels I can barely recall, Adrian insisting Miriam was a good girl and urging me not to be prejudiced against her. That was the beginning of our conflict. Later, Miriam came to apologize, but her apology felt more like a veiled display, an apology laced with hidden triumph. I could see the pride tucked under her contrite smile. I shoved her lightly with my books and said coldly, "Don't block the way." I didn't push hard, but she stumbled as if she'd lost her footing and slammed into the wall behind her. Her eyes went red as she asked me, "Isabella, do you really hate me that much?" I hadn't even had time to answer before someone yanked me hard from behind. Caught off guard, I nearly fell. I turned my head. It was Adrian. He looked at me coldly, as if standing up for Miriam. She already apologized sincerely. "What more do you want?" After a pause, he added, "Besides, she never did anything wrong in the first place." His grip on my wrist hurt. The books I'd been holding fell scattered to the ground, landing on my feet and making them ache too. Miriam hurried forward, tugging on Adrian's sleeve, pleading with him not to fight with me for her sake. Such hypocrisy. At that time, I was still young and proud. Though my eyes stung with tears, I stubbornly refused to cry. I glared coldly at Miriam and said bluntly, "Miriam, you're disgusting." Then I turned to Adrian and said, "Adrian, you're a fool." I didn't know exactly how Miriam behaved when she was alone with Adrian, but I could imagine, because she'd learned everything about him from me. She always knew how to cater to his preferences, how to create those perfect coincidences that made them seem so compatible. Adrian mistook those coincidences for fate. He grew fond of her. Even when I later told him it was all information she had pried from me, Adrian just assumed I was jealous. To him, Miriam was that wonderful girl he had such a good impression of. After that, Adrian and I entered a cold war. While he and Miriam grew closer and closer, the tacit understandings that once belonged to him and me were gradually replaced by Miriam. He studied with her, accompanied her to exhibitions, and even took Miriam to the secret places that had belonged only to him and me. One day, when I pushed open the rooftop door, I saw them sitting side by side, looking at the sky while eating ice cream. That kind of unspoken harmony. After that, we simply stopped speaking to each other. I remember there was a long period when Adrian and I didn't exchange a single word, until the first semester of our third year in middle school, when Miriam transferred back to her registered hometown to take the high school entrance exams. I don't remember who gave in first, but time blurred many things, and distance blurred even more. Gradually, Adrian and I reconciled. Though the mirror between us was cracked, we tacitly agreed never to bring up Miriam again, not even a little. It became almost deliberate, until today, when Miriam reappeared in our world. Chapter 4. Before walking back into the classroom with the test papers, I reminded Isolde, these are all old matters. Don't spread them around. I don't want more trouble. They really were just little things. If I told people, it would sound like I was being petty and holding grudges, clinging to trivial matters even now. But it's like swallowing a living fly while eating. The disgust is something only I can feel. But clearly, Miriam never had the awareness to draw boundaries with me. I never really understood her, even at the worst of times between us. If we met on the street, she could still smile like nothing happened and greet me. When there were lots of people, she'd even squeeze in and ask me and my friends, "What are you talking about?" Sometimes she brought candy or snacks to class to share, and she never avoided me on purpose. In the crowd, she'd even ask, "Isabella, do you want some?" No matter how cold I was toward her, she always put on that magnanimous look, as if she never cared. My once closest friends, though they didn't know the truth, still tried to persuade me, "Isabella, you should learn from her. I don't know what happened between you two, but let me tell you, people like her will rule the world in the future. Compared to your cold face that keeps others at a distance, she seems so tolerant, generous, and kind. No wonder Adrian thinks she's innocent. Look how gracious she appears." But I couldn't learn that. Maturity and smoothness are things I'll have time to pick up as I grow older. For now, I just want to be a young person with clear likes and dislikes. Sometimes, when I looked at Miriam's ever-present smile, I couldn't help but wonder, wasn't she tired? Now was no different. I was working on my math test paper when she suddenly turned around with hers, pointing at a multiple-choice problem. In a gentle tone, she asked, "Isabella, can you explain the idea behind this question to me?" I paused, my eyes shifting to her face. She was beautiful, with a soft and harmless smile. If I didn't know about the arrows she had once shot into my back, I might have felt goodwill toward her too. She returned my gaze with that gentle smile, but my long silence must have made her uncomfortable. Her voice softened further as she called my name in confusion. "Isabella?" Adrian, beside her, glanced over, subtly, but clearly as if worried I might bully her. I suddenly laughed and said, "Why don't you ask Adrian? He's good at math too. No need to take the long way around." Miriam's eyes dimmed with a hint of sadness. She lowered her voice and asked, "You're still mad at me, aren't you?" I stayed silent. Later, after the first self-study period, while she stepped out for something, Adrian turned back to look at me. He wasn't obvious about it, but he said, "Isabella, she's already being so humble, trying so hard to make peace with you. Why do you keep holding on to the past and giving her the cold shoulder? She really likes you and wants to be friends. Can't you be a little more generous? I just don't get it. Is that old matter really worth resenting for 2 years? Back then, wasn't it just a movie she and I watched together?" I sighed. After all I'd explained, he still thought it was just about a single movie. I'm not a petty person. Many friends even describe me as laid back and easygoing. I don't know, maybe from an outsider's view, I do look overly sensitive and narrow-minded in this case. But I don't know how to make Adrian understand. This was never just about one movie. Maybe I'm not cunning. But I have my own bottom line and principles. I'm not a fool after being betrayed once. I won't generously hand over my heart again, only to let someone stab it a second time. That wouldn't make me magnanimous, it would make me an idiot. If I can't outplay her, then at least I can avoid her. But Adrian's gaze was cold and disappointed as he defended Miriam. She's already trying so hard to reconcile with you. And you're still like this? Truly unreasonable. He didn't say the words out loud, but I knew that was what he was thinking. Compared to my harshness, Miriam looked so innocent and magnanimous. I lowered my head, not wanting to see him anymore, and said calmly, I'm not lacking friends. He sighed, sounding disappointed. You're always like this. I wanted to ask him always like what, but Miriam had already come back, smiling as if nothing had happened. Out of sight, out of mind. I lowered my head again. Adrian turned back to his seat, and neither of us said another word. Chapter 5. Isolde said I was too naive. Just one afternoon and 2 evening self-study sessions were enough for her to see through Miriam's tricks. My God, that scheming pretentious coquette, her methods are truly disgusting. Do you think she doesn't know the things she did behind your back? Do you think she doesn't know how much you dislike her and don't want to deal with her? Of course she knows, but she still insists on acting friendly toward you in front of Adrian. Playing weak. Sticking her warm face against your cold shoulder. Why? Is she a masochist? Of course not. It's because she understands you. She knows you won't respond to her. The gentler and more magnanimous she acts, the more petty and unreasonable you look. Her methods aren't exactly brilliant, but they work. Isolde said this with dramatic emphasis, looking at me like she was disappointed in my lack of cunning. This trick only works on someone like you. Isabella, listen to me, you need to fight magic with magic. I left the last piece of pancake for Isolde and asked her what kind of magic. Chewing as she spoke, she sneered, isn't she all gentle and magnanimous? Who can't put on a facade? Just accept her friendliness and weakness. Pretend to be nice back. It's just acting, anyone can do it. I paused. Isolde's parents had divorced early. She lived with her father, who later remarried, and her stepmother had 2 more sons. In that family of 4, palace intrigue was a daily drama. Compared to that, these so-called schemes for favor were nothing to her. I understood what she meant, but how should I put it? I liked Adrian, yes, but that didn't mean I wanted to do things I despised for his sake. I wasn't going to play schemes and fight another girl in a hidden battle just to win a boy's affection. That wasn't me. I liked Adrian, and because of that I was willing to do foolish things for him, but using tricks to wrestle over scraps of his attention, that was something else entirely. I wasn't going to stoop that low. Think about it, Isolde said. Adrian's only acting this way because Miriam has blinded him. Do you really want to hand over the boy you've liked for so many years to the person you despise the most? If you do nothing now and just admit defeat, that's what's truly humiliating. And I swear, one day when you're sitting at his and Miriam's wedding, you'll regret that your pride and self-respect stopped you from doing anything. Isabella, I'm your friend, and while I admire your pride, I still have to remind you, if you want love, sometimes you need to bow your head, compromise, and endure grievances. I fell silent, my mind drifting back to that summer. Adrian had carried me on his back, my leg in a cast, climbing carefully, one step at a time. Drops of his sweat fell onto the gray concrete stairs, and I had cried from both pain and being moved, while he only laughed and said, Isabella, don't just sit there, count how many flights I carry you over. Our classroom was on the 6th floor, 24 steps per flight, for 10 days. He carried me up and down, 2,880 steps in total, and there were all those long, innocent years we had shared as childhood sweethearts. To hand him over so easily, I really couldn't accept it. I said, fine, then let's fight magic with magic. That was the last time I tried to fight for Adrian, letting go of my pride and dignity, using a method I despised the most. Also, I could give the years I had liked him a conclusion I wouldn't regret. So the next morning, when Miriam turned around with a piece of bread in her hand and gently asked me, Isabella, did you skip breakfast again? I have some bread. Do you want it? I paused, then took the bread from her hand, smiling softly, friendly and grateful. I said, thank you. I was just a little hungry. Her hand, suddenly empty, froze for a moment. Meanwhile, I kept smiling at her and bit fiercely into her breakfast. I knew she had only asked me casually. It was supposed to be her breakfast. She probably expected me to refuse bluntly as always, but now it looked like she would be going hungry all morning. The smile that was always fixed on her face faltered for just a moment before returning as usual. Yet in her eyes, there was a probing look, as if trying to figure out what had caused my sudden change. I lowered my lashes. Adrian, sitting beside her, actually chuckled and teased me, "You're eating like a starving wolf." I laughed too. I was too hungry. "Thanks, Miriam, you really saved me in time." And with just that one line, I knew that the quarrel and tension Adrian and I had had the night before, all because of Miriam, had completely vanished in this moment. Miriam smiled, but she didn't say a word. She simply turned back around. Chapter 6. As long as something has a beginning, doing it doesn't seem that difficult. I also started to act. Pretending to be a friendly desk mate to the new student wasn't too hard. I accepted all of Miriam's gestures of kindness toward me, the snacks she gave, the water she specially bought for me. I accepted everything and politely thanked her. Sometimes, when she came to ask me something, I would also answer her patiently, with a gentle smile. Adrian, of course, was happy to see this. He even seemed quite pleased with my change, smiling as he said, "Isabella, you seem more mature now." I just smiled without saying anything. This time, Adrian and I didn't quarrel because of Miriam. At least, we maintained a superficial peace, perhaps realizing that her tactic no longer worked on me. Miriam's warm enthusiasm became less frequent. Both of us understood without speaking, but in front of Adrian, we still played along. But honestly, I found it meaningless, saying sarcastic things that even I found ridiculous. Pretending to be close and forever friends with someone I actually despised. It wasn't me. I preferred being straightforward, never beating around the bush, and I didn't like wasting my time on people or things I disliked. It felt exhausting. The first time I thought everything was becoming absurd was in the second week, when Miriam had already found a new way to provoke me. She and Adrian sat together, so being intimate in front of me was effortless. For example, asking Adrian to cut off the tag at the back of her shirt. I could see her snow-white neck when she lowered her head, and Adrian's slightly flushed face. Or during self-study, the two of them whispering softly, exchanging knowing smiles. Or when Adrian brought her pastries from the school gate, she would deliberately turn to me, smiling with hidden meaning, and ask, "Isabella, this is red date cake Adrian bought for me. He bought too much, and I can't finish it. It'd be a waste. Do you want some?" I stared at her until she looked away, shifting her gaze awkwardly before turning back around. I lowered my head to look at the formulas in my book, but none of them sank in. I closed my eyes, letting my mind go blank, and finally decided to lay my head down for a 10-minute nap. I was woken up by the noise Adrian made when he returned. After playing ball with classmates, he had probably washed his hair at the water basin, so it was dripping wet. He brushed it all back, making his features look even sharper. Droplets of water fell on me, and when I drowsily looked up, he was smiling. He placed a bottle of yogurt on my desk and said with a grin, "I happened to find it at the convenience store. You never managed to buy it, right?" I ran pretty far. "How are you going to thank me?" I didn't answer. I glanced at the bottle of yogurt. It was my favorite flavor, the rare one that was so hard to find. It was fresh from the fridge, still beaded with cold droplets. When I reached out to hold it, the chill seeped from my palm through my whole body. I looked up, just in time to see Miriam's cold gaze shift casually from the yogurt to my face. She stared at me blankly for a moment, then looked away, as if she hadn't seen anything. It was the first time I hadn't seen her fake trademark smile. I didn't know what Miriam was thinking, but I knew my own thoughts, and they were definitely different from hers. I felt tired. Adrian was always like this. This bottle of yogurt he bought for me was no different from the red date cake he bought for Miriam. He used these things to stir our hearts up and down. Did he like me? Or did he like Miriam? If he liked me, why was he so good to Miriam? But if he liked Miriam, then why go out of his way to buy the yogurt I loved? The old me would definitely have thought this way, constantly guessing Adrian's intentions, twisting them over and over in my mind. Then, just to hold on to his affection, I would compete with Miriam, working even harder to please Adrian. But not anymore. Now, I was thinking about Adrian. He seemed to like Miriam, but he often did things that made me misunderstand him. If he weren't always doing things that made me misread him, if he openly showed he liked Miriam, I would have let go long ago and even smiled to wish them happiness. I couldn't help but wonder, Adrian, does he really not know about the undercurrents between Miriam and me that were all because of him? Or does he know, and simply enjoy it, watching Miriam and me fight over him, using ambiguous, half-suggestive moves to pull us deeper in while he sits back and laughs at the show? Like an ancient emperor balancing powerful ministers, one house mustn't dominate. So you use tactics to keep them in check. Give this one a little reward. Give that one a reprimand. Then turn around and give this person a reward and that person a reprimand. Watch the two of them struggle and quarrel over the treat in his hand. Miriam was beautiful. I was smart. Two girls who, to others, seemed excellent. Openly and secretly vying for him. Didn't that make him feel proud? I remembered when Miriam transferred away in 9th grade. Back then I had already resolved not to pay Adrian any mind, at least to stop liking him, but he suddenly became warm toward me again. Winter sweet potatoes and candied hawthorns. Summer chilled watermelon. He did the chores for me, then stood before me with that handsome, lazy smile and asked, "Still mad at me?" Later, when a thug from another school kept harassing me, he dealt with it, 1 against 6, coming back with the corner of his mouth bleeding. But victorious. At that time I wavered. But I still didn't make up with him. He didn't care. He followed me every day, guarding me to and from school, afraid that thug would bring people to block my way. The sunset stretched his shadow long. He followed at the perfect distance. His shadow lay beneath my feet, and I stepped on it foot by foot, softening my heart just like that. But now, I felt tired. He and I grew up together since childhood. I don't want to speculate about him with such malice, turning both of us into people unfamiliar to the ones in my memories. Adrian's affection was that treat. He used that treat as bait, making me like a fish near shore, constantly struggling, thinking, what if I struggle one more time and fall back into the water? Chapter 7. The guillotine of fate fell earlier than I had imagined. Perhaps heaven itself wanted to help me make a decision. While I was still hesitating and struggling, something very small happened. It was an ordinary day. Just an ordinary PE class. Miriam wore new shoes. After running a lap, the skin at the back of her heel was rubbed raw. And somehow, the strap of her sandal also broke. That day, the math teacher had called me aside. So when I arrived at the track, I saw Miriam sitting on the railing. On her feet were Adrian's shoes, to be exact. The shoes I had given to Adrian. I never understood why boys liked that brand so much. I had saved up my pocket money for a long time. And the night before, I had gone to line up, even bringing a small tent to sleep outside the store. Only then, after struggling against scalpers and the pressing crowd, did I manage to buy his favorite style. I still remembered what I was thinking as I walked out of the mall, hugging the bag with satisfaction. I imagined Adrian's surprised expression when he received the shoes. How bright his smile would be, whether he would think highly of me, and whether every time he wore them, he would remember me. That day, unfortunately, it poured. Holding an umbrella in one hand and hugging the box tightly in the other to protect it from the rain, I was crossing at the pedestrian light when an out-of-control electric bike crashed into me, dragging me across the filthy, rain-soaked ground for over a meter. Half conscious, my first instinct was to check the shoes in my arms. The skin along my arm was badly scraped, and my whole body was covered in wounds. But the shoebox, held tightly in my embrace, was perfectly safe, without the slightest damage. Relieved, I only then felt the pain all over my body. My legs hurt so much I couldn't even stand, and my head was spinning. A kind passerby helped me to a cafe by the roadside, where I rested for a long while before recovering. Later, when I finally gave Adrian the shoes, I had cleaned myself up, hiding all the injuries. He didn't see the scars. And, just as I expected, he was happy, smiling brightly, and promising me he would treasure the shoes. But now, they looked like garbage no one valued, trampled under Miriam's feet. Her heel was completely sunk into them. The shoes were far too big for her. She clomped against the railing with them, making hollow banging sounds. I didn't know if she simply liked the sound or if she knew those shoes were my gift to Adrian and wanted to test his attitude toward it. But from how she kept stomping without feeling pain, I thought it must have been the latter. After she grew bored, she stepped on one shoe with the other foot. Back and forth. Adrian sat not far away, holding glue in one hand and her broken sandal in the other, patiently repairing it. When he heard the noise, he looked up at Miriam, only to smile indulgently, helplessly. It was in that moment, as if a veil had been lifted, that the question that had tormented me for so long finally had an answer. Isolde once told me that if I gave up at that time, then in the future, when I went to drink at Adrian and Miriam's wedding banquet, I would regret doing nothing for the sake of my pride and self-respect. She told me that to win love, one had to bow, to compromise, to endure grievances. But she forgot to say this: if that person truly liked you, even a little, he would never make you bow, compromise, or endure grievances. I still didn't fully understand Adrian's ambiguity and tenderness, but I no longer wanted to twist and turn, guessing and probing. My feelings were like those shoes Miriam was stomping underfoot just now, unvalued. I didn't mind Miriam treating the shoes that way. I just suddenly understood, a gift that isn't treasured only proves that the giver of that gift isn't important. I stood there quietly by myself. I thought I would be angry. I thought I would be furious. But for some reason I felt very, very calm when Adrian half-kneeled in front of Miriam to help her try on the sandal he just glued. I even smiled slightly. Then I turned and left, quietly, like a breeze passing without a sound. I once read online a line that said something like, "At that moment a tsunami rose in my heart." But I kept silent and let no one know. No one knew then either. At that instant I finally made a decision. Compared to how everyone knew I liked Adrian, my letting go of him was done in absolute silence. After PE class, classmates filtered back. I sat at my desk, calmly working on the test. Miriam and Adrian returned together. Seeing me seated, Miriam looked a little surprised and took the initiative to speak. "Isabella, you didn't go to PE." I smiled politely, keeping my distance. The homeroom teacher wanted to talk to me about something. By the time we finished it was almost over, so I went straight back to class. She paused. Compared to the performative friendliness we'd been putting on recently, my attitude toward her now was a different kind of calm, ordinary politeness toward a classmate. She quickly caught on and, smiling, continued, "That's a shame. My sandal accidentally broke today, and Adrian had to glue it back together." She made a slightly troubled face and added, "I don't know if it'll hold until after school." I smiled calmly and joked, "If you're worried, you could ask Adrian to walk you home, give him a chance to be your guardian." This time she was truly stunned, not understanding the implication. I looked back at her without flinching. My gaze slid over to Adrian's face. He was holding a bottle of water. Hearing my remark, his brow knit quickly. I smiled politely at him, then bent my head back down to my test. Before the last period ended, Adrian didn't step up to be a guardian. Instead he turned to me and asked, "Isabella, a new shop near the school just opened that sells sour and spicy rice noodles. Aren't those your favorite? Want to go?" Miriam blinked. Her eyes drifted over and she pressed her lips together, saying nothing. Adrian looked confident. I paused and pretended to think for a moment, then answered with an apologetic smile, "I already arranged to go eat rice rolls with Isolde. You can go by yourself or with someone else." He probably hadn't expected me to refuse. If I were the old Isabella, I would have jumped at his invitation. I wouldn't refuse him for Isolde. If earlier he had only knit his brow, now he was genuinely puzzled. He stared at me as if trying to see into my heart and find out what I was thinking. He moved his lips, glanced at Miriam, then swallowed whatever he intended to say. He smiled, a little gently, and said, "All right then, if you've got plans I won't go. I actually don't like that stuff anyway. Next time you want it I'll go with you." Such an evocative, ambiguous line, yet now, his few words no longer tugged at my heartstrings. I think I will never be trapped again in that shifting sea. I only smiled at him and then bent my head back to my exercises. What is true letting go? It's not cold wars, not cutting off contact, not splitting and never meeting again. It's that my attitude toward you stays the same. I speak to you kindly. I don't throw tantrums. I'm not jealous when you're close with others. I might even tease you about it. You won't even notice the moment when I start to drift farther from you. To be an ordinary friend. To be a normal classmate with no emotional turbulence. That, for me, is real letting go. Chapter 8. After I refused Adrian a few more times, he finally texted me, "Isabella, are you upset?" By the time I saw that message, a long time had passed. That didn't used to happen for everything involving Adrian. I used to prioritize him. I would always reply instantly. And I'd even leave a topic in my reply so he could keep the conversation going, so it wouldn't end too soon. But he was lazy and indifferent to those little efforts of mine, even though he was the one who started the chat. I could wait with my phone in hand all night after replying and never get a response. I smiled and texted back, "You're overthinking. What could I possibly be mad about?" This time he did reply instantly, tentatively, "Because of Miriam?" I actually laughed out loud. See, that proved he really understood everything. I closed my phone and didn't answer that message. The next day in class we met again. I kept up the act of nonchalance, smiling, answering like any other day. Working on my paper, there was nothing outwardly different at all. There wasn't even anything to pick on to start a quarrel. Adrian looked at me as if he had something to say but held back. Miriam looked a bit stunned too. Rarely did she have a stretch of time without performing in front of me. Because I no longer engaged. Her performance was wasted. It's like punching cotton, pointless. You wouldn't do it again. You see, if you truly don't care, you win. Our uneasy peace was broken when the arts and science streaming list came out. I chose arts. What surprised me, yet somehow didn't, was Miriam's choice. Her science grades were a mess, but maybe she wanted to stay in our class to remain Adrian's desk mate, so she chose science. I began to look at her differently. Honestly, I'd always thought of her as scheming and fake, but I never expected that she could be so completely sincere toward Adrian. Perhaps she was too sincere. Someone so worldly and smooth actually failed to see through Adrian. When Adrian, his face dark as iron, came over to find me, I was prepared. He tapped my desk and said, "Isabella, come out with me for a minute." This might have been the last time we had an honest, face-to-face conversation, so I stood and followed him out. It was strange, though someone he didn't care for hadn't gone where he wanted. He acted as if he'd been truly betrayed, as if he really liked me. He suppressed his anger and asked, "Why? Didn't we agree?" I smiled and, casually, asked back, "When did we agree?" Yes, when he had mentioned that agreement before. I had only blushed shyly. From my delighted expression he had assumed I would never leave him. He was choked by my words, then looked at me with certainty, not asking anymore. He said, "You're upset." He spoke as if I were jealous. I cut him off, looking straight into his eyes with honesty. "Adrian, I'm really not upset." A flicker of confusion flashed in his gaze. I smiled, giving him the answer he probably never imagined. Lightly, I said, "I just don't like you anymore." He hadn't expected that, and stood frozen. I looked at him with a smile and asked, "You knew I used to like you, didn't you, Adrian?" His silence was as good as an admission. I had imagined countless times what it would be like to say the words "I like you" to Adrian. In every fantasy, the moment was beautiful, filled with hope. I had never thought that one day, when I finally said those 4 words, they would be preceded by "used to." Adrian was clever, and we knew each other so well. He understood I wasn't being stubborn or playing games. I truly didn't like him anymore. There was no need for more words. Before we parted, I did have one question. Puzzled, but why? He understood what I meant. I thought he wouldn't answer, but after a pause, he said, "You're too proud," and I understood. What I was really asking was why Adrian, knowing I liked him, would keep me dangling at arm's length, hot and cold, teasing a girl who had cared for him for so long. And Adrian's answer was that I was too proud. It was true. I hadn't clung to him desperately, nor behaved as if I couldn't live without him. The moment I felt him turn cold, or sensed no affection from him, I would retreat to a safe distance, treating him with polite detachment, back to being just friends. So he gave me illusions, played at ambiguity, created a false sense of affection, and yes, he was much gentler to Miriam than he ever was to me. Perhaps, in part, it was because he wanted to tame me. How ridiculous. I turned away. Before leaving, I told him, "Goodbye, It wasn't politeness. Even if we wouldn't be in the same class anymore, we were still in the same school. Of course we would see each other again, but when we did, we both knew it would only be as strangers who gave a nod in passing. That was good enough. Chapter 9. Before the holiday. The last person I unexpectedly saw was Miriam. I had gone back to the classroom to move my books, after all. Once the new term began, I would be in the arts class and wouldn't have to return there again. For some reason, Miriam was there too. She looked at me and said, "Talk?" We ended up sitting on the rooftop, each of us holding a cup of iced cola. She smiled and said, "Does this count as the calmest day we've ever spent together?" She tilted her head toward me, the wind lifting her long hair. "I didn't think you'd give up so decisively," she said. I thought for a while before answering. I just realized that anything you can only win by fighting and scheming won't last long. Her face went pale, and she gave me a half-smile, half-mocking look. "Are you talking about me?" she asked. I ignored the question, finishing the last sip of my cola. Then I gave her one final piece of advice. "Miriam, I used to think that Adrian either liked you, or he liked me, or maybe he liked both of us, just to different degrees. But later I understood, he doesn't actually like either of us." I watched the color drain from her face completely. Though she still pretended nothing was wrong, she knew it too, deep down. Because when someone truly likes you, they don't make you bow, compromise, suffer grievances, or twist yourself up trying to guess what's in their heart. I sighed. "What's more, you know even better than I do how that so-called understanding between you and Adrian came about. Maybe he thinks it's fate. Maybe it makes him treat you differently than others. But a kind of liking that's built on that kind of illusion, it won't last. A liking that won't endure. An ambiguous affection. Unstable and wavering. A terrible science report card." I didn't know if Miriam would regret her choices in the future. But none of that had anything to do with me anymore, because I was standing inside my own future. And I was certain my future would no longer include either of them.